Okay guys, how do you do? I'm recording this on Christmas Eve. As it's a nice day, I've decided to do the recording in the garden. But there's a sneaky little breeze outside which is ruining the recording, so I've retired to my car, which I've set up as a makeshift office. Unfortunately, this means I do get a certain amount of noise from the other inhabitants of the garden and the pesky planes from the nearby airfield. I'll do my best to reduce the interference. First, Happy Christmas to all ye who are wailing and gnashing your teeth under the stresses of lockdown. May you rise above such insanities and direct some suitable profanities in the direction of the government and its lackeys. Right, to hell with the government, to hell with the virus. Let's talk real estate. As I mentioned in earlier blogs, the average property market is made up from several different types of property, and the buyers have different aims. All this will affect the various types of property differently. Let's start with commercial property. The lockdowns of the past year have seriously affected office space. Let's have a look at the maths, which is where it really counts. To run a business from an office block both costs and ties up rather a lot of capital. There's the cost of buying the block in the first place, or the cost of renting. Then there are the running costs, the rates, heating, cleaners, ancillary items such as maybe running a cafe, first aid, etc., etc., etc. Then there are the costs of the staff, from wages to pension schemes and insurance. Starting off a business with a large capital outlay is not the ideal way forward. Doing without an office block saves that initial outlay, or it removes the need for ongoing rental expenses. Making the majority of staff work from home saves on insurance, ancillaries, and other things. Staff can be monitored to make sure they are working by using appropriate software, and that nowadays is currently available. There are other benefits too. The staff don't have to waste their time on public transport getting to and from the office. It also saves money on the travel costs. The office camaraderie is lost, but I don't know how to assign a value to that. It is also the case that we aren't suddenly going to see people working from home. This is a move that will happen gradually, but it will start to affect the price of the average office block. Who needs to buy one or keep renting one if home working can be managed? This trend will lead to a slide in commercial valuations. The answer here is obvious. Don't invest in office space. It's going out of fashion. The more automated things can be, the less staff is needed anyway. So that leaves us with an important question. What happens to the office block? Glad you asked. Blocks of offices have been converted into flats for some time already. That move will be continued and extended. This will help to provide more accommodation for families. Conclusion? Don't buy into office space until it is empty and a company seeking funding is prepared to take it over and convert it to residential. But of course, always check both the company and the maths. Indeed, this is one for the investment crowd or those seeking a steady pension income. But what about residential property? Are we heading for a crash, as so many pretend experts claim? Well, the evidence at the moment would appear to be contradictory. The real downer is what conclusions lenders will draw from the lockdown experience. Moratoria on rents and mortgage payments don't do the lending or investment side of the business any good. There's also the question of the gradual extension of the use of robots and more AI-driven automation. Robots don't need wages, or sick pay, or maternity leave, or paid holidays, and the average robots can work 23 hours a day. Also, Robots are getting cheaper, while wages keep rising. It's a no-brainer. I foresee swathes of office workers out of work in the very near future. The same is going to happen to truck drivers once driverless trucks become mainstream. With the tech side of driverless cars already on version 4, and with version 5, which is the ultimate in driverless motoring on the testing pad as we speak, that situation is only 2 or 3 years away. What is all this going to do to the mortgage market? We have testing times ahead. One metric at the moment is paramount. Mortgage payments rely on wages, and wages rely on jobs. If you lose your job and can't retrain for another, bang goes your ability to service a mortgage. House prices can only rise in line with rises in wages. We aren't in that environment at the moment. I would need to see what happens to the economy post-Brexit and post-lockdowns before hazarding an opinion on where wages are heading. At the moment, they're not heading anywhere. As usual, I see the metrics pointing in opposite directions. New technology and new trading deals will help the British economy in the near future. This will initially lead to higher wages for certain sectors, but longer term I see technology eventually putting large swathes of the population out of work. That will tend to reduce the owner-occupier stats and increase the rental stats. That will probably also lead to an increasing use of companies running the rental sector and a more static market in terms of pricing. It will be more simple and more profitable to invest in such companies rather than entering the rental market as an individual. One metric that keeps appealing to those who don't understand housing markets is the apparent disparity between those who want to buy a house on the one hand and the number of houses available on the other. One thing one has to learn, that has nothing whatever to do with the likely direction of the market. Nothing whatever. Lots of people want to buy a Lamborghini. Few actually manage to do so. In such markets, the maths is simple enough. You don't buy what you want, you buy what you can afford. And that takes us back to the level of wages. If you don't believe me, look back at the house price crash at the end of the 80s. Almost overnight, houses lost about half or even more of their value. Was there suddenly a drop in the number of people available to go out and buy? Of course not. The population level and those wanting to buy were roughly the same in 1991 as they were in 1989. But we will no doubt still get people trotting out the same old rubbish. So, what's the conclusion here? 2020 is going to be a year of testing times. Which way will things go? It's definitely a suck it and see year. I don't believe the main movements will take place in pricing, but in the choice of area. Pricing is going to be messy. If you want to sell your 10th story flat, I suspect the price you'll get will go down as the year progresses. If you want to sell a nice suburban detached house with a garden, expect the price to go up. The real problem is going to depend on how many companies do go bust in the end and whether there's an economic boom to come. The answer to that is in the lap of the gods. Not only that, but it does take time for things to work out. Conclusions are not going to suddenly appear. 2021 could well develop into as messy a year as 2020. In the next episode of this series, I will be taking a closer look at which metrics one needs to observe to get your bearings in the market. Do join me for that. Well, that was going to be the end of this week's property blog, but as I was about to do the audio for the YouTube version, I received some news about the coronavirus situation in the UK. I have to admit I'm appalled at what I hear. Let me make just a couple of comments. Governments make plans well in advance for coping with disasters. There is already a master plan to deal with situations such as the coronavirus pandemic. The United States and Europe set guidelines on how to cope with such a pandemic. Broadly speaking, the playbook was that young people should stay in school, businesses should remain open, and people should carry on working. The rules set out that you isolate the at-risk segments of society, in other words the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions. If anybody becomes infectious or has symptoms, they should self-quarantine. Masks should only be worn by healthcare professionals or those believed to be symptomatic. I'm now told that the lockdowns are worse, and that one is even forbidden to sing carols in church this Christmas. Let me repeat that the UK, with lockdowns, has certified over 1,000 deaths per million population, supposedly due to the virus, while Japan, with no lockdowns, has, wait for it, 23. The only conclusion I can rationally come to is that the UK is ruled by a bunch of certifiable lunatics. And in the meantime, I'm trying to make some sensible predictions about what will happen over the course of the next 12 months. How, for pity's sake, how can one make any sensible predictions about what is likely to happen in a lunatic asylum? I will continue to try, but those of you living anywhere in Europe are heading rapidly into a nightmare of insanity. Not for me, thank you very much. The only sensible question to ask at this point is, when is the uprising planned? Okay. Back to the Christmas pudding. As everybody says these days, stay safe and have some fun. See you next week.